Hello, my friend. On today's episode, I have a very exciting guest. First time on the podcast. It's Lars Hanson. He's a Unicorn Society member and founder of Ignite Your Game in Kansas City. And on this episode, he's talking about some explosive revenue growth he's had for the last year. About 60% revenue growth year over year he's experiencing right now. And he breaks down all the million tiny little things that he's done to make that huge impact on his business. He breaks it down in a really simple way, things that you can all do starting today. So if you want giant revenue growth, this is a great episode for you. Keep on listening. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to let you all know that you might have missed it, but Mark wrote another book over the last year. It's a little book of gym marketing secrets, and it's honestly the book you're going to wish you had when you first started your gym. It's a really quick read. It's maybe an hour of materials, and it's no fluff. It gives you everything you need to improve your marketing and nothing more. So if you have not gotten that book yet, we're offering a completely free digital copy. Click the link below in the show notes and grab your copy and start reading it today to level up your marketing. Our gift to you, which brings me to today's episode, which is very exciting. We have Unicorn Society member Lars Hanson on the call today, and he is the founder of Ignite Your Game, which is one of the best gyms in Kansas City. So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, Lars. Welcome.
Thank you, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so excited to have you. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and your gym over the last however long we've been working together, almost a year. And so just tell the audience a little bit about what is Ignite Your Gym? Who do you serve? How do you serve them?
Yeah, great question. So I started Ignite about 19 years ago. At the time, I was just a seventh grade student, and I was coaching my third grade brother, and then it kind of grew into some of his friends and teammates. And so 19 years later, still doing that. We started in my parents' backyard. Now we have a small commercial space and we kind of rent out some fields. But my main focus is I just help athletes run faster and jump higher for whatever sports they play.
Yeah. Good for you. I love it. And what a great thing to dedicate your energy, life energy to. And so I wanted to have you on the podcast for a few reasons. One, because you're doing such great work, but two is you've seen some really great growth over the last year. I mean, so far, almost year to date, you're on track to have about 45% increase in total revenue. And I think you said you're on track to finish by the end of this year, almost 60% revenue year over year jump, which is pretty huge. I mean, most gyms would kill for half that amount. And so how's it feel to have such a huge jump in your revenue?
Yeah, it's honestly kind of mind blowing. It's been a dream of mine to open up our own facility for a long time, and that goal has kind of just felt impossible for a while. Yeah. Just with rising expenses, things like that. And so This just feels like we took 20 steps forward in the right direction in 1 year versus like 1 or 2 steps in the right direction in previous years.
Yeah, good for you, my friend. You've put in the work. And I think what you just said there, a lot of our listeners have been feeling, right? The fact that sometimes it can feel, running a gym or any small business can feel like running in place. And with mounting expenses and things over the last few years, especially post-COVID, it can feel like you're walking backwards sometimes, even though you're working your butt off. Mm-hmm. So good for you to take such a huge leap forward. And what I want to do on this podcast is just kind of unpack some of the things you did over the last year that really attributed to this growth. I mean, we're not going to cover everything because often it takes like a million little things to make a big leap forward like you have. But I want to cover the big, most important things. And we were talking about this before. You mentioned that actually your mindset was one of the things that you felt was like the bottleneck that you had to get in front of. So say more about that. What role did your mindset have to do in holding you back and then unleashing you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my big thing was over the course of the last 3 years, our revenue had just been completely flat. And that was really by my own choice. I did not want to increase prices because I didn't want to be a financial burden to the families that I was coaching. And at the same time, I didn't want to increase the number of kids that I was coaching because I didn't want to lead to like shallow relationships. I didn't want people to come in and be like, man, Lars doesn't even know my name, So to kind of limit those two things, I basically just put caps on them. And obviously that's not really healthy. I know that they say that anything that's not growing is dying. Mm-hmm. If a tree's not growing, it's dying or it's dead. And you can't do that with a business either. So you've got to have some kind of direction, some kind of aim. And I think yeah, Ben and Mickey and just this whole team were able to kind of help me sort some of that stuff out
Yeah.
of that as well as just mentors and stuff from church and things like that.
Of
So
course. Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to start by just applauding you, Lars, because the things that you were worried about are super kind of high integrity things to care about, right?
mhm,
It's actually really great that you care about the fact that you
yeah,
want your place to be accessible and
yep,
affordable and not a
yep,
financial burden. That's amazing, right? It's
yep,
great that you want to make sure that you maintain really great relationships with everyone you serve. These are fantastic things to care about.
yep,
And it just goes to show that any belief that you have can become a limiting belief when kind of stretched too far.
yep,
Right,
yeah,
that those are
yep,
great things you should keep caring about, and
yep,
you took them to the place where they were actually holding you back from serving more people, holding you
mhm,
back from building the sustainable, viable financial business that you wanted to have.
yep,
And so the fact that you were able to kind of get those out of your way is fantastic. So talk to me a little bit about once your mindset started to shift and you thought, okay, maybe I can increase my rates, maybe I
mhm,
can find a way to scale relationship building.
yep.
What did you do differently?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the big things was I started by kind of calling my coaches to a higher standard of like,
Hmm.
I need to be able to trust that these guys are going to fill in the gaps of what I can't do as we start to grow.
Yeah.
And they really took that call well. And then we actually started getting these more, signups and registrations, things like that. And then I was able to turn around and bless them,
Yep.
with the fruit of our growth. And then that gave them even more of just like, oh man, this is awesome. So
Yep.
it's like they're getting to see and feel the fruit of their own hard work as well. And so I think that was one of the big things for me is like
Hmm.
when revenue stays flat, but expenses have just been astronomically increasing over the last few years. That's me eating that cost.
Yeah.
And so when you have this extra income at your disposal, it allows you to do all kinds of stuff. You can be a
Mhm.
blessing to your staff. You can be a blessing to people that are in financial need. You can say
Yep.
like, hey, you can come train here for free or a discounted rate. Like, um, versus when you don't have that extra income, that's a whole lot harder to do. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
um,
It's hard to be generous when you're the one in need.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's so fantastic. I love that the first thing was really like rallying your team to this new vision, right? And
yep,
that's one of the things we talk about all the time in leadership is your job is to point the team in the right direction.
yes.
Give them a sense of where you're heading and why. And it seems like you did that beautifully. Plus a lot of other tactical things. For example, you raised your rates. And when you did, what happened?
Yeah, I was expecting that there was like this slim chance that literally there'd be such rebellion over our prices increasing that I'd
Yep.
go out of business and we
Yep.
wouldn't even put food on the table. And instead, we had the opposite.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't lose anybody to a price increase. And we added like another 10 or 15% of registrations to the
Mm,
next session versus what we had previously. So,
yeah.
um, so yeah, that was just awesome.
Yeah.
And
Listen,
and people, even just the responses of people was like the most encouraging thing. Like, there's an option to tip on our website, and people
uh-huh.
were tipping and like
Oh,
saying, "You deserve this." Like,
wow.
we want to support you and the aim that you have. And so that was like a man, just weight lifted off the shoulder. Like, man, people really see the value of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, good for you. And Lars, you've probably heard me say this before. I've certainly said on this podcast. It's scary to raise your rates,
it
right?
is.
So many people are nervous that people are just going to leave or be mad at them or think that you're stingy or just it's all about the money for you.
Yep.
And I bet there's no one at your gym who thinks that about you, Lars. Right? You've been doing this work with such high integrity, building such strong relationships with your community that no one's going to think that. But it's very natural to be nervous. And I say that every time I've seen a gym owner raise their rates, there's all this anxiety and fear beforehand, and then afterwards they were like, "Wow, I wish I would have done that a year later, earlier, or
Yeah.
a few years earlier in some cases." So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you feel supported in that moment. The other thing that obviously you were afraid of is getting more people in the door might mean that you have worse relationships or more shallow relationships with
Mhm.
people. How is that? What's happened there?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I feel like it's kind of by God's grace. I've still been able to learn everybody's names and like have good relationships, but at the same time, I've really just been relying on my coaches to really go deep with them in ways that
Yep.
I can't. So we've kind
Yes.
of got some more systems in place where I focus a little bit more on our advanced athletes in each class. And then my newer coaches work more with the newer clients and kind of do some of the onboarding, like
Yes.
beginning technique. So we really just had to I had to better delegate the responsibilities of the gym in order for us to make these steps forward.
Yeah, it's so wise, Lars, because the important thing is that all of your clients have a relationship that's meaningful with someone on your team,
Yep.
but they can't all be you.
Yep.
You
Yep.
can't be the one that they have a super deep relationship with, and that's a
Yep.
hard lesson to learn. I mean, I myself,
Yeah.
just my own experience share, even as Business for Unicorns and Unicorn Society has grown over the last few years. It's really hard for me to know everyone's name, and for me to be the coach that everyone really knows well. Many of them don't know me at all.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's actually great because we have a
Hmm.
fantastic team that they
Yep.
can be close with, that they
Yep.
can connect with. And I'll just share for myself, that's been hard to not be the one that is the one with the relationship.
Yep.
But to your point, both of us have had to get better at delegating that responsibility
Yes.
to our teams, giving them the tools to develop the relationships, and then you can scale. Right? You can
Yep.
scale relationship building when there's more than one person that needs to have the relationship.
Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, cool. So those two fears you had seems like you've overcome them and then some,
Mhm.
but
Yep.
you've also gotten a lot more people through the door, right? So there's lots of million tiny things you've been doing to now open the floodgates and let more people in. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the kind of marketing tactics and things you've done to like build your connection with your community?
Yeah, I mean, one of the real simple things is just making good social media content.
Yeah.
And so I have a background. I actually have a second business of wedding videography,
Yep.
and so kind of just using some of those skills and kind of learning how to just be more engaging on social media has been
Yeah.
helpful. Um, but additionally, just trying to seek out our own current clients for referrals. I never really wanted to do that before. I didn't want to come across as like needy or like, I think about like those different like those different companies that do the social marketing type kind of stuff. And it's like people just get that strong pushback feeling. And I
Sure.
didn't want our gym to come across in that way. But the reality is that people are satisfied with the service that they've been getting, and they're really quick to be like, oh yeah, we have these teammates or these friends that I think would also benefit from this. Our whole team would get better if they were training with you. And so that's kind of been like a really easy thing to just offer up the opportunity for these guys to come into the gym, and we reward them with like hoodies or Ignite merchandise or things like
Yep.
that.
Yeah, good for you, Lars. I think, referrals are one of those things that you're right, can feel really slimy and feel like, every time you're interacting with clients, you're just like begging them to like, give me all your friends' phone numbers and emails. And no one wants to make their clients feel like that. But,
Yeah.
you're finding a way to do it that still feels like it has integrity, where it feels like, you're rewarding people for helping expand and grow your community, which has got to feel good. That's amazing. So the way you've driven more referrals, excuse me, is finding a way for you and your team to actually ask for them and then providing incentives that your
Mhm.
clients really care about. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Good for you. So just going back to social media content for a second, just I want to pull that thread just a little bit further. So one of the things that, I think mistakes I see a lot of gym owners make is they're putting out content, but the content isn't engaging. Right.
Mhm.
I think it's a distinction you were just making, which is
Mhm.
it's one thing to just put stuff out on social media that is kind of just talking to your audience. It's another thing to ask your audience to actually engage with you in the
Mhm.
form of commenting, liking, sharing, etc. So what have you done to make your content more engaging for your audience on social media?
Yeah, great question. I think a huge thing is just kind of like understanding the needs of our athletes
Hmm.
or the things that they struggle with, their pain points,
Yeah.
and then trying to educate them in those things.
Yeah.
And so, things about sleep, things about, eating vegetables, things about, protein, the stuff that like oftentimes like it may not get addressed directly in an in depth, in an actual workout,
Yep.
but in like a social media video, you can kind of like convey some of that stuff and then talk about it, next time you see people. And so it's really just having an ear to what the kids are going through in the gym, finding the things that they struggle with, and then trying to speak into them via social media.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Because I think a lot of times, a lot of fitness teams, their social media is driven by like, what do their trainers care about right now? What are they thinking about? What are they learning about? And I think you're so wise here to say like, no, actually, the way we've done it is think about what are their pain points? What are our
Mhm.
clients talking about? What do they care about? How to make content that speaks to the challenges they're having, and then obviously using that content to start a dialogue. both
Mhm.
online and in person, right? 'Cause I think the
Yep.
best kind of content is content that starts a conversation, right?
Mhm.
Conversation by getting to comment or like or share or
Yep.
DM you, or a conversation in person based on social media content. So I
Yep.
think that's really why I think for a lot of our listeners, that's a great takeaway, which is, if your content is not speaking to the direct pain points of your clients, and you're not creating content that starts a conversation, but you're just lecturing people
Mhm.
in one direction online, which is a lot of
Yes.
content I see, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it's gotta be one that starts a dialogue. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, Go ahead. Were you gonna add to
No,
that?
no, that's great. Yep.
Yeah, I was say another thing that I know that you've been doing. I want to bring up to our audience here, which I think is small but really important, and this is specific to sports performance. But I think even our non-sports performance listeners can take away something from this, which is, obviously you're working with a lot of youth athletes. They're all at practices and games every night of the week and most weekends, it seems,
Yep.
right? And one of the things I know you've done to start to improve retention and drive referrals is show up at
Mhm.
those kids' games. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that that's something that I started probably 19 years ago,
Hmm.
and there's really no ambition that that would be like, this is how we grow our business.
Yep.
It's really just we get a lot better buy-in from the kids when we show up to those games,
Hmm.
and they just feel the love and support of an outside coach, a
Yep.
mentor coming to their game. Like I remember when I was a kid, that was like the most special thing in the world when somebody that was like an older mentor or something or another would just decide to show up
Yes.
and watch a race or a basketball game.
Yes.
So yeah, that I think that's something that I was just like, man, I want to do this for other people,
Yep.
and now I've kind of helped my staff to kind of realize the importance of that as well.
Yeah.
Just the way that kids feel cared for and things like that, and ultimately, they're going to be working harder for us in the gym when we do something like that. But oftentimes, you may or may not see an ROI, on something like that. But like I would say, like the return on like emotional investment with something like that is
Yeah.
100% worth it.
Yeah, well, listen, I think that the fact that it's one, the right thing to do, support the people you care about doing what they care about is a right
Mhm.
thing to do as a person. And there's absolutely going to be an ROI, whether how measurable it is, I'm not sure, but you being present to see for the families to see you there and for the families of people who are not yet your clients to see you there, to see you
Yep.
supporting them, right? That makes a big difference about the kind of reputation you create in your community. I'll also say this, just putting my social science nerd hat on for a second. There's been some research over the last 5 or 10 years that has actually changed what we think teenagers need in terms of relationships in their life.
Mhm.
And so we used to think that the most important relationships teenagers have is with their peers,
Mhm.
that's the most formative relationships. Excuse me. And what we've learned in the last, like I said, 5 or 10 years is actually it's not. Actually, the most important relationships for teenagers is relationships with adults,
Mhm.
that they actually need mentors and adults, and they want relationships with adults. We often think of teenagers as being people who are like, leave me alone, right? But the reality is that they need to have relationships with the teenagers, mentors, coaches, etc., and they crave them. They crave
Mhm.
them. And so I think the fact that you can provide that by showing you that I'm not just showing up when your parents are paying me, right? I'm
Mhm.
showing up because I actually am invested in your success, that it goes a
Yep.
long way to developing those relationships that I know you and so many people listening really care about, which
Yep.
is great. I want to share one more thing that I know you're doing. I think is really small but important, like a tiny tiny task but big output, which is you send cards. You send cards to people. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I think there's just something that's really powerful about a handwritten note.
Yep.
My favorite coach of all time, Bill Snyder at Kansas State University, that was something that he would do to like anybody and everybody he met. He'd just like write thank you cards, and he'd do it to his players. He'd do it to random staff members, even like janitors, things like that. Like anybody and everybody, he'd write these handwritten notes. And that was just something that I wanted to start doing more of. And so just taking, a few minutes or a few hours each week to write out some thank you cards and then mail them out to clients just to celebrate their wins or to
Yep.
encourage them amidst injuries or things like that. I just think that's something that's
Huge.
yeah, it's huge, but it's small, but it's huge.
100%. Takes you a few minutes, but has such a huge impact. People just don't get that kind of mail anymore. And when they do, you really stand out from the
Yeah.
crowd. So I think that's a great takeaway. All right, Lars, let's wrap it up. For all of our listeners out there who are like, wow, I really want to follow in Lars's footsteps. I want to see 40, 50, 60% year over year revenue growth. What's your kind of parting wisdom for them? What's the parting kind of roadmap you want to leave them with for how to do it?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just find mentors. I mean, this has been a great spot to people who actually know gym ownership. You know, prior to this, I didn't know a single gym owner.
Mm,
um, you know, especially in my sports performance field that runs something similar, and so to have guys that are not only gym owners but actually in that same space has been super helpful because they've been able to identify those bottlenecks either in my own head or in my actual business. And I think one of the things that Mickey told me a long time ago is like, you're basically just constantly trying to find what's the biggest bottleneck, you know, in your
yes.
business right now. What's the biggest limiting factor, and then addressing it. Find out what better systems you need and how can you attack that. And it's the small things over time that add up to the crazy growth, you know.
Yeah.
So
Good for you, Lars. And you're absolutely right. Whether those boundaries and obstacles and things holding you back are inside your head or outside in the world, you got to figure out what
yes.
they are and
Yeah.
start to get, clear the way to your path for growth. So I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your success and your lessons learned. I hope to keep tracking your journey and have you back when you've continue with another 50, 60% year over year growth jump. So keep crushing it, my friend. And thanks for being here. Dear listeners, if you want to go grab Mark's free book, click the link in the show notes. It's a free digital copy of Mark's marketing book. Don't miss it. Thanks again, Lars.
Thanks so much.